the agenda are and the contents for the meeting and reviewing those as well. So what you see is a kind of bottom line is that projecting total expenditures of $423,000 with a surplus of about $31,000 over what was appropriated. Now, when you look at the costs that are subject to the 0.18% of the reserves, those include additional costs that are not in the 1920 budget. So that was based off of $360 million the last time the budget was created, and we all know that that's significantly less at this point. Again, going into budget planning for next year. When you look at the difference between what 18/100ths of 1% is and what is spent in the 1920 budget, there's roughly $224,000 worth of financing that's available for other applicable costs. Those are primarily our attorney and kind of due diligence on disability, our fiduciary insurance through Driver Alliance, and our annual audit through Jim Slide. Kind of coming down to the very bottom line, if you look at the 18/100ths of 1%, I'm projecting ending the year, or we currently have, based upon the projection for 1920 and the year-to-dates on these other items, about $115,000 in dollars that are available really for those items for, again, the disability due diligence, Driver Alliance and pay, and Jim Sly's billings if they're not completely in, they're very nearly in. So it's primarily our due diligence on disabilities for the balance of the year. So we'll come back in April. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. At this point in time, the budget looks as if we're well within our appropriations, well within our 18/100ths of 1%. I look forward to April, another date where I think we can kind of start looking at budgets and running some scenarios, because that $360 million base for the calculation is just not going to be available. So we're going to be dealing with probably much reduced numbers.
I have two questions on this. Do we have the ability to roll this 18/100ths of 1% calculation? And of course, I was looking at the assets from June of 2007. We know that's going to be dropping, but and isn't there a sunset on that provision that allows us to have excess? There's additional dollars that we can apply to technology and other things to get the system sort of up to date?
There's a couple, I think, kind of two elements to that answer, and one I may have to defer to Tim on a little bit based upon his history. Is the 18/100ths, my understanding is resets every year.
So we couldn't roll, if we do have some remaining, we cannot roll that for the next year?
There's no such thing as fund balance that accrues. The interesting thing about that, and speaking with other administrators at the Calipers Roundtable, is that there's different ways in calculating that, or in determining that 18/100ths of 1%. Some of them do it on a rolling monthly average of what their net assets are. Some of them pick a date and time and use that, so it's a known number for budgeting for the next year. Some there's a 1-year lag. So there's that's one of the areas where there is, I think, a broad explanation of these administrative costs under the 37 Act. There's been interpretations, different interpretations by 37 Act counties. The $1 million that you alluded to, or the increase in the percent from 18/100ths, I think, to 23/100ths of 1% for automation, that sunsets in January of 2013. So there's a period of time where dollars are available specifically for automation purposes. As I mentioned before, in looking at pension automation systems, and I know that's high on the board's list of priorities, one of the things that we're going to look at is at what cost. We need to really go through our reserve levels, and as you kind of, that cascades down to the bottom line of what's available really in your excess earnings. So where you pull the $1 million from is key. It's not just that we have an extra $1 million. It's where does it come from and at a cost of what?
So in terms of this calculation, I think this is going to be a very serious issue given the decline in terms of the entire portfolio that everyone is experiencing. Wasn't it going to require some possible state legislation to change that formulation, and is that being looked at, is that going forward? Because I think we really are going to need to spend some time and look at some options, because when this comes forward, obviously some cost containment that we could do here, we're predicting, a balance, that's great, but I don't know that it's going to be enough to sort of be able to let us just sink in with the current expenditures for next year, because it's probably not going to work.
Right, and Sackers is going forward and looking at this. There are a couple of options that they're thinking may be helpful. One is kind of looking at a unique amortization of 2008, given that there's been an assumption that 2008 was a unique year. Now with the start of 2009, there's some question as to how unique that is. So as far as amortizing those losses, is there a way to kind of pull those out of the normal smoothing formula? And that would certainly create a higher level of asset value against which you would apply that formula. The other thing that's being discussed, and there seems to be at least some interest in it at the legislative level, is that at the highest level of asset value, that amount is deemed to be appropriate for a certain level of membership and activity within retirement associations. And so there seems to be a little bit of interest in possibly saying, for some period of time, let's acknowledge that essentially grandfather in a particular appropriations level or a particular base for a period of time. There may be some interest in doing that. That has to, I say that though with a caveat that everybody's struggling at this point, and so you're talking to legislators that are having difficulty balancing the state budget and so forth, and so whether or not there will be success in having them provide this kind of relief to pension systems, we don't know this time. I think we have to plan accordingly based upon the current formula.
So I think what we should have for April then is a complete set of options for, because you said different systems use different methodologies to figure out how they arrive at the figure, right? So obviously we've ascribed to one that we've been using over time, but maybe we need to look at what are the other options out there if there really is that flexibility. I mean, if that's flexibility we now have, I think we ought to, we just better be informed about what are the various ways we could arrive at a figure and select one.
Understanding it could go both ways.
Right.
One of the other proposals that they talked about at Sackers was tying it to the liabilities rather than the assets. The liabilities is a much more stable number, and it probably reflects your needs of the funds to provide everything you need for your system, because that's what you're striving for, is to cover your liabilities rather than using your assets or your investments that can change the liability. That I think is going to get more play than anything.
Okay. So that difference between the 23-100s and the 18-100s, that's dedicated towards the technology enhancements?
Correct.
Question? Oh, one more question. Is there a reason, a specific reason why some of these contract costs are below the budget line as opposed to included in the budget? Like Tony Graham. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I could defer to Tim. I don't know if there's any history where actually